The bridge of the Athelian scout cruiser Luminance was a testament to perfection. Its crystalline command throne hummed in harmonic resonance with the ship's core, and the air itself shimmered with refracted light. From this throne, Captain Giles commanded his vessel with the serene confidence of a being who knew his species. The Ethel were the undisputed arbiters of the galaxy. "Report," Giles stated, his voice a series of melodic chimes. From a lower console, Junior Sensor Warden Lyra hesitated, his own crystalline shell shifting from a calm cerulean to a troubled violet. "Captain, an anomaly at the edge of the sensor. Range." "Pirates?" Giles chimed, the sound laced with boredom. "Or another lost freighter?" "Neither, Captain," Lyra replied, his manipulators tracing patterns on his console. "A fleet, 20 vessels. They do not move correctly." The main holo display shifted, showing a cluster of icons. The ships themselves were brutalist wedges of dark metal, their hulls pitted and scarred as if they'd clawed their way through 1,000 battles. They looked ancient, yet they moved with a speed that left no detectable energy wake. Their transponders were silent, their thermal signatures impossibly cold. "Analysis of hull markings is inconclusive," Lyra stammered. "The patterns match archaic files from the deep archives, from the purification era." A ripple of unease passed through the bridge crew. The purification was a dark footnote in their otherwise immaculate history, a time when a primitive, violent species was pacified for the good of the galaxy. "Extinct curiosities," Giles scoffed, dismissing the concern. "Some scavenger must have found their derelicts and bolted engines to them. They pose no threat. Hail them, demand they identify themselves, and submit to inspection." Lyra complied, sending out the standard ascendancy hailing frequency. The void remained silent. The strange fleet continued its purposeful, ghost-like advance, an instinctual dread, an emotion his species had long since bred out of themselves, coiled within Lyra. These were not scavengers. This was something else. Then, a transmission broke the silence. Not on their hailing frequency, but on every channel at once. It was a raw, visceral wave of sound, a language of guttural consonants and hard vowels that hadn't been heard in 5,000 years. The ship's translator struggled, then produced a single chilling sentence. "We are the Retribution Armada. Your time is at an end." On the bridge of the Luminance, Captain Giles' serene confidence shattered. The alien broadcast was not a threat, it was a verdict. "Impossible," he chimed, his crystalline form flashing a brilliant, angry crimson. "Power weapons. Target the lead vessel and obliterate it. Teach these primitives the price of insolence." Energy conduits along the Luminance's elegant hull glowed with power. The ship, a pinnacle of Athelian design, could crack a continent with its primary cannon. Its multiphasic shields had never once failed in the ship's centuries of service. Lyra watched his console as the targeting solution solidified, a cold certainty settling in his core. This would be an execution. But the human fleet didn't wait. They didn't fire plasma bolts or laser beams. There was no bright flash of energy, no warning shot. From the lead human vessel, a sliver of pure blackness detached itself and shot across the void. It wasn't a projectile. It was a distortion, a ripple in space-time itself. "What is that?" Giles demanded. "What is that weapon?" Before Lyra could answer, the distortion struck. It didn't impact the shields, it simply passed through, them as if they weren't there. For a microsecond, everything on the bridge felt heavy, compressed. Then came a sound no Athelian had ever heard aboard their ships, the high-pitched scream of their own hull tearing itself apart. Lyra looked up at the main holo display and saw a web of fractures spreading across the ship's forward section. The gravity lance hadn't delivered an external impact. It had warped the very space the ship occupied, causing its crystalline structure to collapse under its own internal stress. It was like watching a diamond shatter from a single perfectly placed tap. "Hull breach on decks 1 through 7, an officer shrieked. Structural integrity failing. Our shields are not responding. Another ripple of darkness shot from a second human ship, then a third. Each found a different Athelian vessel in the small scout fleet. Each had the same result. Across the void, ships of perfect design and unmatched power were being unmade, crumbling into glittering dust without a fight. Giles stared, his melodic voice gone, replaced by a horrified, discordant screech. The primitives weren't just fighting them. They were negating them. Their technology wasn't inferior. It was incomprehensible. Lyra, acting on the pure survival instinct his people had forgotten, clawed at his console. He bypassed command protocols, compressing all the sensor data from the last 30 seconds. The impossible vectors, the ghost-like signatures, the terrifying gravitational weapon, into a single, tight-beam distress signal. He aimed it toward the heart of the Ascendancy. As he hit send, the bridge around him exploded. A gravity lance had struck the luminance amidships. The last thing Lyra saw was the command throne cracking in two and the beautiful, refracted light of the bridge dissolving into the absolute blackness of the void. On the core world of Athelos, within the Grand War Chamber, Radiant Eminus Valerius watched the final garbled data fragment from the luminance flicker and die. Silence, heavy and absolute, filled the hall. His war council, composed of the Ascendancy's most brilliant military minds, stared at the holographic display, their crystalline forms shifting in muted shades of confusion. The weapon's signatures are a physical impossibility, High Admiral Thraxon finally chimed, his tone sharp with disbelief. Gravitational lensing on that scale, weaponized and delivered with such precision, it would require a power source the size of a small star. And the ships themselves, another counselor added. The designs are identical to those of the Purified, yet they moved with a velocity that violates known inertial physics. Valerius remained silent, his own luminous form a deep contemplative gold. The Purified, a species his ancestors had pacified 5 millennia ago, a footnote in their glorious history. It had to be a coincidence. It is a fluke, Thraxon declared with dismissive arrogance. Some scavenger race must have discovered a single ancient artifact and mounted it on their primitive ships. They are a nuisance. Nothing more. A single battle group will suffice to sterilize them, the council murmured in agreement. The Athelian Ascendancy had not faced a genuine threat in 2,000 years. The idea that a fleet of relics could challenge their supremacy was laughable. Yet Valerius could not shake a profound sense of unease. Flukes did not annihilate an entire scout fleet in under a minute. Nuisances did not broadcast declarations of retribution in a language that was supposed to be dust. Dispatch the third battle group to the Thrax sector, Valerius commanded, his voice resonating through the chamber. Thrax was a vital industrial hub in that region. Investigate this anomaly. If it is hostile, eliminate it completely. As his admirals chimed their assent, Valerius stared at the faded icon of a purified warship still lingering on the holo display. He was sending one of the Ascendancy's finest fleets to deal with a ghost, and for the first time in his long life, he was not entirely certain it would be enough. High Admiral Thraxon's third battle group ripped through hyperspace, emerging into the Thrax system like a shard of vengeful light. 50 of the Ascendancy's most advanced warships, their crystalline hulls shimmering with contained power, arranged themselves into a flawless attack formation. Thraxon, observing from the bridge of his flagship, the Stellaron, felt the familiar chime of impending victory. Whatever primitive race had stumbled upon an ancient weapon was about to be educated on the true meaning of power. Then the reports flooded his console. Thrax was already under siege. The planet's orbital defense platforms, each capable of repelling a dozen standard cruisers, were being systematically dismantled. The enemy fleet, those same 20 scarred black vessels, moved with a horrifying fluidity. They weren't engaging in formations. They were hunting in packs, weaving between the defense platforms and firing their impossible gravity lances at will. They are ignoring our hails, High Admiral, his communications officer reported, his usual melodic voice now strained. "Then we shall communicate with our cannons," Thraxon declared. "All ships, advance and engage. Target their lead vessel. I want it reduced to atoms." The third battle group surged forward, a wave of righteous power meant to sweep away the insignificant foe. They fired their primary weapons, unleashing torrents of coherent energy that could boil oceans. But the human ships didn't meet the attack head-on. They scattered. Their fleet broke apart into smaller squadrons that looped around Thraxon's perfect formation, firing from unexpected angles. Their FTL drives spooled and discharged in microseconds, allowing them to blink short distances, vanishing from one location and reappearing in another. Thraxon's fleet, designed for overwhelming frontal assaults against organized navies, was thrown into chaos. Targeting systems couldn't lock onto ships that refused to hold a predictable course. His captains, trained in millennia of established doctrine, were unable to adapt. In less than an hour, the third battle group was not a fleet, but a scrapyard of shattered crystal and dying stars. Thraxon's last sight was that of a human destroyer blinking into existence directly in front of the Stellaron, its gravity lance aimed at his bridge. From his command bunker deep beneath the capital of Thrax, Ground Prefect Kylus watched the orbital battle with detached dismay. The loss of the third battle group was a strategic catastrophe, but it was a distant one. His domain was the ground, and his formations of Phalanx-class war drones stood ready, their energy cannons charged. The primitives might control the void, but the surface was a different matter. Here, the Ascendancy's logic and superior machinery would prevail. The first human dropships breached the atmosphere. They were not the elegant landers of the Athelian military, but ugly, armored bricks that slammed into the ground with bone-jarring force. Ramps crashed down, and from the smoky interiors emerged not vehicles, but figures. Bipedal, encased in brutalist suits of charcoal grey armor, they were larger than any Athelian. Their movements were not the gliding grace of his people, but the heavy, purposeful strides of predators. "Engage at will," Kylus ordered, his voice a calm series of chimes. "Maintain formation. Eradicate the hostiles." 1,000 Phalanx drones opened fire, unleashing a precise, coordinated volley of plasma bolts. The human soldiers, Huskals, his tactical display designated them, should have been vaporized. Instead, they charged into the plasma storm. Their suits glowed red for an instant, as energy shields, crude but effective, flared and died, and then they were through. They closed the 500-meter distance in seconds. Kylus watched, his logical mind struggling to process what he was seeing. His drones, designed for ranged combat, were suddenly facing a melee. The Huskals didn't use rifles. In one hand, they wielded thermal lances that roared to life, spitting white-hot fire. In the other, massive kinetic force gauntlets crackled with raw power. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. A Huskal would slide under a drone's plasma fire, ram a thermal lance into its leg joint, and tear it free. Another would meet a drone, head-on, its gauntlet smashing through the machine's armored torso with a sickening crunch of metal. They moved with a terrifying, intimate brutality Kylus had only read about in historical texts on the Purified. This wasn't warfare as the Athelian understood it, a clean, calculated application of force from a safe distance. This was rage given form. This was personal. His perfect formations of war drones, the pride of the Ascendancy's ground forces, were being dismantled, torn apart like toys by monsters. The Huskals weren't just destroying his machines, they were hunting them. Through his bunker's external sensors, Kylus heard them, their suit comms broadcasting sounds his translator identified as battle hymns, harsh, rhythmic songs of glory and death. A thunderous boom shook the bunker. Kylus looked up at the main blast door. A glowing red circle was appearing in its center, as a thermal lance cut through 10 feet of reinforced alloy. His drones were gone. His perimeter was broken. The last thing Prefect Kylus heard was the screech of tearing metal and a triumphant human roar. The reports from Thrax were not data, they were screams. An entire battle group annihilated. A planetary ground force of war drones dismantled. The Ascendancy's pristine record of martial perfection had been shattered in a single day. Shaken to his core, Radiant Eminus Valerius sealed himself within the deep archives, a forbidden sanctum where the Ascendancy's uncomfortable truths were interred. He needed to understand the purified. He needed to know the face of the ghost that had returned to haunt them. He approached a featureless black plinth and placed his hand upon it. Access Archive 7 Zeta. Authorization: Valerius Eminus Radiant. A hidden compartment hissed open, revealing a single obsidian datasphere. This was a mnemonic sphere, an ancient and dangerous technology that didn't just display data but allowed one to experience it. With trembling manipulators, he lifted the sphere and interfaced with it. His consciousness plunged into darkness, then reformed into the mind of an Athelian soldier 5,000 years ago. He was standing on the scorched soil of a world called Terra. Above, the Athelian fleet hung in a sky thick with black smoke. Around him, his ancestors, their crystalline forms glowing with righteous fire, were conducting the final stages of a purification. He saw cities of glass and steel turn to molten slag, green fields burn to black ash. He felt the soldiers' cold satisfaction, the serene belief that they were cleansing the galaxy of a chaotic, violent pest. Then the perspective shifted. He was now viewing a tactical display from the fleet's flagship. Most of the planet was categorized as sterilized. But one blip, a tiny science vessel, was fleeing the system. It wasn't a warship. It was a civilian craft, desperately trying to escape the apocalypse. The Athelian commander on the recording laughed, a chime of pure contempt. "Let it run," the ancient commander said. "It is heading directly for the Kronos anomaly. The nebula's gravitational shears will tear it to shreds, a fittingly chaotic end for a chaotic species." The simulation ended, leaving Valerius gasping in the silence of the archive. He saw it now. The horrible, universe-altering truth. They hadn't exterminated the purified. They had cast them out, sending them into a region of space so hostile they considered it a death sentence. But the humans hadn't died. They had endured. They had been replanted in the darkest soil of the void, and for 5 millennia they had been growing, nurturing a root of pure, unadulterated vengeance. The fleet in his space wasn't a ghost. It was a harvest. The first sign of the end was not a warning, but an arrival. The sky above Aethelos, a sky kept perpetually clear by weather control arrays, suddenly tore open. Not with the graceful shimmer of an Athelian hyperspace window, but with a series of brutal, silent rips in reality. The Retribution Armada was not in orbit. It was everywhere at once. Marshal Voron's strategy was one of total systemic collapse. While his capital ships engaged the bewildered Athelian home fleet, human boarding parties, teleporting with a precision the Ascendancy had deemed impossible, materialized on the primary orbital defense stations. Within minutes, the stations, owned defensive cannons, symbols of Athelian dominance, swiveled and opened fire on their masters below. Simultaneously, the ugly, brick-like dropships plunged into the atmosphere. They bypassed the grand military landing fields and instead slammed directly into the hearts of Aethelos's crystalline cities. Huskars poured into the streets, ignoring the panicked citizens. Their targets were precise: central power conduits, communication nexuses, transportation hubs, and the harmonic resonators that kept the floating districts aloft. For the Athelian military, it was an unsolvable nightmare. They were trained to fight battles with clear front lines and honorable rules of engagement. The humans offered neither. The battle was not on a field. It was in their homes, their skies, and their command networks simultaneously. War drones sent to intercept the Huskars were ambushed from above and below. Squadrons scrambled to engage the human ships in orbit, found themselves fired upon by their own captured defense platforms. the perfect, serene order of Aetherlos, a civilization that had not known true war for millennia, collapsed into pandemonium. Towers of spun crystal, once symbols of their flawless artistry, came crashing down as their harmonic supports were severed. The city's melodic hum was replaced by the guttural roar of human weapons and the discordant chime of Athelian screams. It was a symphony of chaos, conducted by a species that had learned to weaponize it. The Ascendancy did not just lose a battle, its very concept of reality was being systematically dismantled. The siege of Aetherlos was not a siege at all, it was a dissection. From the apex of his command spire, radiant Eminus Valerius watched his perfect world burn. The tactical displays were a sea of red icons, each one representing a failure, a collapse, a defeat. The Ascendancy was dead. All that remained was spite. With a final, desperate series of chimes, he initiated the ultimate sanction, the Planetary Annihilation Protocol. If the Athelian legacy was to be extinguished, he would ensure their tormentors died with them, scoured from existence by the energies of Aetherlos's own sun. The countdown appeared on the main holo display, 10 minutes to solar ignition. A violent explosion blew the reinforced doors of the war chamber from their hinges. 2 Huskars stepped through the breach, their thermal lances still glowing. They took positions flanking the entrance, their posture radiating lethal stillness. Between them walked a man in unadorned black battle armor, his helmet held under one arm. His face was a mask of cold fury, his eyes chips of ice. "Radiant Eminus Valerius," the man said. His voice was not loud, but it filled the vast chamber. "I am Marshal Kalen Voron." He glanced at the countdown. "You will cancel that. You have destroyed my civilization," Valerius chimed, his voice cracking. "You will not have its corpse." Voron took a slow step forward. "Your civilization was built on a throne of lies and a foundation of our bones. You think this is war. War is for rivals. This is pest control." He gestured dismissively at the opulence of the chamber. "You cast us into the Kronos anomaly, believing it would be our tomb. You were wrong. It became our crucible. In that dark nebula, we did not find death. We found new laws of physics. We bent gravity. We folded space. For 5,000 years, every child was born with a single purpose: to build the tools for this day. Every soul in our Armada is a descendant of the people you tried to erase." Valerius stared, the full, horrifying scope of his ancestors' failure crashing down upon him. They hadn't just created an enemy, they had forged their own executioners, in a furnace of their own making. "This isn't an invasion," Voron stated, his voice dropping to a whisper of pure venom. "This is a sentence, passed down through 200 generations, and I am here to see it carried out." With a gesture from Voron, the Huskars moved. The Annihilation Protocol was cancelled. Valerius and the surviving members of his high command were taken into custody. Their trial was swift, their sentence absolute. There was no mercy. Mercy was a luxury humanity had unlearned in the darkness between the stars. A day later, a message was broadcast from the bridge of the flagship UNS, Vengeance, reaching every inhabited world in the known galaxy. On the screen stood Marshal Kalen Voron, the ruins of Aetherlos visible through the viewport behind him. "To the peoples of the galaxy," he began, his voice devoid of triumph. "For 5 millennia you have lived under the shadow of the Athelian Ascendancy. You believed them to be paragons of order and enlightenment. You were wrong." The screen split, displaying the recovered recordings from the Athelian Deep Archives, the undeniable proof of Terra's purification. "They built their empire upon genocide," Voron stated. "They maintained it by suppressing technology and erasing histories. Today, that empire is dissolved. We, the descendants of those they failed to erase, have delivered their sentence." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We are not your new masters. We have no desire for empire. The worlds once shackled to Aetherlos are now free to determine their own futures. Our purpose is complete. The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, 1,000 species stared at their screens in stunned silence. The greatest power in history had been dismantled in a matter of weeks by a ghost from the past. The Retribution Armada did not leave. The scarred black ships remained in silent orbit over the liberated worlds, their engines cold. They were not an occupying force. They were a monument, a grim, terrifying reminder that some debts are never forgotten, and that in the cold calculus of the universe, there is no power greater than a species with nothing left to lose. The galaxy was free, but it was also afraid, for it had seen the face of a legend brought back from the dust, and it knew it would never sleep so soundly again.